In this video I'm going to have a look at some graphs and charts for continuous variables. So I'm going to go back into my graphs chart builder. I'm going to reset this and clear it all out. And let's say we want to have a look at age. And to start off with, we might just want to do a histogram. So I'm going to click histogram down the bottom here, drag that in, and then you need to make sure that you drag age into the x-axis. Again, the most common mistake for this graph is that people try to drag stuff into the y-axis, and that will just mess it up. If it does get messed up, click the reset button and just start from scratch. And you can see that once I put a variable in here, it changes this to histogram. So we can do a plain histogram like that. And again, yours may have come out with really ugly colours. And actually, in this case, I'm not sure I'd want the vertical lines. I might take them out and keep the horizontals. And we get some extra information on the side here. And if you didn't want that information floating, you could just delete that, and you could delete the title if you were going to put a figure caption below. So something that we can do with the histograms is put a normal curve over the top, and that will help us make a sort of a visual judgment about whether our data is sort of normalish. Now, there are tests for checking if your data is normal. We're not going to look at those at the moment. We're just going to eyeball our data and see what we think. So display the normal curve. And it will try to fit a normal curve over anything. So the fact that it has put a curve over it doesn't mean that the data is normal. That's up to you to have a look at the curve and have a look at the data and go, is it bulky in the middle and then tails out either side? And this is probably okay. It's not a massive sample size, so there's nothing too non-normal about this that I would be concerned. And we'll get into that later when we do the stats. So that's a histogram. We could also use a box plot for continuous variables. So back to graphs and go down to box plot. And if we've just got one variable, the simple version is actually on the end. So drag that one on top and click OK. So this middle line represents the median, not the mean. And it's dividing our data up into quarters. So this is the age range of the lowest 25%, the next 25%, next 25%, and the upper 25%. So this box will show us what the middle 50% of the people, what their range was. And this is our interquartile range here. So usually we don't want to look just at one variable by itself. We usually want to compare this with something. So in this case, we might want to compare the age between the two groups. So if I bring up Chart Builder again, and we put in this box plot, you can see that it will do a few together. So for this plot, we want the age range displayed on the y-axis. So we're actually going to drop the age in the y-axis, which is different from the other plots I've done so far. So I've put age in there, and then we would need to work out how we want to split this. Now you could split this by a whole lot of variables, but in this case I'm just going to stick to looking at the treatment and control. So I'm going to add the group in here. And the treatment group seems to have a little bit more variation in it than the control group. But these are small samples, so I don't know that I'd be overly worried about this difference here. Now, if you're feeling adventurous, you could try and do a graph which has 3 variables on it, and I'll let you experiment with that. And that would be this one here. So you could drag that on. Think about what else could you cluster by, perhaps gender, and then check you can interpret the graph, which is always the trick, of course, at the end. So that's your box plots. Very quickly, we're going to take a look at scatter plots as well. So scatter plots are over here, and we usually use these when we want to look at 2 continuous variables together. Now in the paper, they do a scatter plot of the depression before and the depression after. So if you've had a look at the paper, you'll see they put the pre-depression score on the x-axis and the post on the y-axis. And we'll do a lot more on scatter plots when we come to looking at correlation and regression. Click OK. And hopefully you're going to find that this is roughly the same pattern that we see in the paper. Now the very last thing that we'll have a look at, we're not going to go through putting the lines on this graph, we'll save that for the section on correlation and regression, but we will colour these dots by treatment group. So if we go back to Chart Builder and we want the one with the coloured dots. Now if you're in an older version of SPSS, some of these options may look a little bit different, but you should still have one with plain black dots and one with coloured dots. So these can stay the same, but now we want to colour these dots by treatment or control, and then we can see if there's any differences between them. So the control group is in the blue, and that's, I'm not sure these are coloured the best, so if I was going to use this graph, I think I might go through and change the colours of some of these dots. Now it's highlighted all the control dots. I think it's because the inside is grey for all of them. Control. I'm going to change that fill to blue as well. And the treatment, let's change that all to red. Oh, I changed the border knot, there we go. And you could even change the symbol shape. So in the paper they've got different shapes there. I'm going to make that bigger. So then we can have a look at, so for someone whose depression before the experiment was around the 30 mark, after the experiment their depression for the control group also looks like maybe it's hovering around that 30 mark, but for the treatment group it looks a little bit lower. So this graph is showing us that it looks like there might be a pattern that the treatment group has slightly less depression afterwards. And obviously the paper will have backed this up with a proper analysis, but this is just to help communicate the results. So have a go with that. Check you can interpret what it all means, and if you are feeling comfortable with all of this, then maybe click through some of the options and try adding some of the regression lines in, but you don't have to do that just yet. We'll look at that later in the course.